friends. Deepak Chopra here, and this is a printout of a new book by John Horgan, My Quantum Experiment. We'll be showing you all the links. You can get it from Amazon, how you can download it, and our conversation about this. And I'm, as usual, always thrilled, delighted to talk to my friend John Horgan. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't. In the end, it doesn't matter. We are all going to be dead in a few years, as I learned from this book. John is obsessed with his mortality, and so am I. And I found this book very interesting. I haven't finished it, to be honest. I'm almost, 3/4 of the way. And I thought at first maybe I should delay the interview till I'd read it all. But then I decided, what the heck, we can talk now. And then we can talk again after I finish my book. But my main interest, John, is actually not quantum physics or quantum mechanics, as you prefer to call it, or even science. But my main interest always is you. Why are you having these questions? Why did you decide to do this quantum experiment, as you want to call it? What did you think you would get out of it? Did you get anything out of it? And most important, does it in any way influence what you learned here through this particular model of science? Does it any way influence your dilemmas about mortality, about growing old, about infirmity, about death, about meaning, about purpose, about love, about compassion, about joy, or what it means to exist? When I was a kid growing up in India, I read a poem from Tagore. And by the way, I've read Tagore since then, nonstop. But I read this, when I was maybe 7 or 8. And somewhere he says, that I exist is a perpetual surprise. And, I was struck by that. Why are we not perpetually surprised that we exist? And why are we so afraid to not exist? Because non-existence is not an experience. It can't be an experience, right? So my first question is exactly, why did you do it? But I want to share with you some of my own insights and learnings to see if there is some alignment between you and me, because I identify you almost like a twin, tortured soul, so to speak. And I don't think you can have a soul if it's not tortured, period. So why did you write this book?
If you're tortured, you hide it pretty well. You seem somebody who is comfortable in his own skin, at least compared to me. So why did I write this book? The immediate cause was that the pandemic happened in the spring of 2020, and it ruined all my summer plans. I had been planning to go to Africa with a friend who actually had just been diagnosed with cancer. And so that's one reason why I was thinking about death, is because I had this friend whom I love who was very, very ill. And so we couldn't go to Africa. I had to find something to do with myself. And I had always had this feeling that sort of imposter syndrome. I've been writing about physics for decades without really understanding quantum mechanics, which is the riddle at the heart of the enigma of modern physics and really modern knowledge. What does quantum mechanics mean? All the physicists say that you can't understand it without understanding the mathematics. So I thought, well, now maybe it's time for me to try to learn quantum mechanics with the mathematics. And maybe that way I will finally get it. And that will make all these other things fall into place. For example, the quest for a unified theory of physics. Some people call it a theory of everything that will supposedly explain the riddle of existence and why there's something rather than nothing, maybe even solve the mystery of mind. All that kind of stuff is related, in my mind, to quantum mechanics. But since you brought up this question of what are we, and of my own uneasy relationship to life and to my mortality, I'll just tell you that where that came from is from my earliest childhood memories. So since I was a little kid, I have felt often estranged from the world. The world seems really weird to me. And the weirdest thing about it is my own self. So I can remember just as a little kid, becoming conscious of myself in a way that was really disturbing to me and thinking, what am I? And how did I end up as this of all the things that I could have been? I had this sense of the improbability of myself. And of course, I'm imposing my own language back on this child, which just had these feelings of weirdness. There's actually a psychiatric term for this, derealization, when everything seems strange and alien to you, including your own self. I've been working on that feeling since I was 5 or 6 years old, trying in one way or another to overcome it. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is whether enlightenment, this sort of culmination of spirituality, at least that's how I've always seen it, helps you overcome that feeling of strangeness and alienation from your own self and from the rest of life, because it hasn't worked that way for me. I've been looking for answers that made me feel that I understood things, understood myself, understood my relation to reality all my life. And in the back of my mind, when I started studying quantum mechanics, was the possibility that maybe this would be it. This would give me the answers that I was looking for. But it had completely the opposite effect. It's just compounded this feeling I have that the world doesn't make any sense at all. And the existence of mind doesn't make any sense at all. The relationship of mind to matter, to the physical universe, doesn't make any sense. So that's what I tried to write about in this book. And it's a little disconcerting because, and not to give away the ending of the book, but I end up more confused at the end of this experiment, as I call it, than when I started. The deeper I went into quantum mechanics, the more mystified I became by all these things that have always baffled me.
My very special guest is John Horgan. You can read all about him at the, where we put in the credits. He's a science writer. He writes regularly for Scientific American, but for other scientific publications. He teaches at a college in New Jersey, science and writing about science. And he's very well known. He's written some controversial books, including The End of Science, so to speak. But the reason I'm having this conversation with John particularly is actually I find certain things that are in common and certain things that are not in common. So what I'm thinking is, as we engage in this conversation, and I want to have more, maybe a series, if you're amenable, around your other work, but also around this book, maybe the two of us having this conversation as non-experts can actually help the experts out a little bit. And I'll tell you why I think like that, okay? My training obviously is not in physics. I'm not a scientist. I trained as an internist Then I trained in endocrinology. Then I went on to study neuroendocrinology. I trained with one of the best in the world. He's still alive, by the way. He's older than your father was when he passed. He's 97 now. And his name is Seymour Reichlen. He was the president of the Endocrine Society in this late 70s when I trained with him. And he was world famous then, Seymour Reichlen at Tufts. Now he's 97. He lives in Arizona. He comes once a year to New York. Maybe next time he comes, you, me, and he can have breakfast in Balthazar, which is where I meet him. And he's 97. If he catches a snake in his garden today, he will dissect it to look for neuropeptides in the brain. He, along with certain other colleagues of that era, were, the original discoverers of these molecules that we all talk about these days: serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, etc. And actually, I remember the exact day in his lab. We were looking under a microscope at something, and one of our colleagues, Candice Pert, who since then passed on, she went on to become the chief of brain chemistry at NIH. And one day she said, these are the molecules of emotion. And I said, wow, that's a very interesting insight. Maybe you should write a book about it. And she said, I will, if you write the foreword. So I did. Now, it turns out that Candice had discovered the opioid receptor, for which she deserved the Wolf Prize, but she didn't get it. She was a fellow, she was a woman. The person who got the credit, Georgetown, was very famous, and she went into a deep depression because she didn't get the credit for having discovered the opioid receptor. But she made some very interesting observations. She wrote a book called Molecules of Emotion, which had a huge impact on my life, on the life of Seymour Reichlen, who, as I said, is 97. And the last time I had breakfast with him, he was giving me a hard time about the hard problem of consciousness. So, we are still back to square one, me and my training and all that. And the reason I bring all this up is, like you, I was 6 years of age in India, growing up in Mumbai, living with my grandfather. And my grandfather was an old army sergeant from the First World War, British Army. And he was kind of a military guy with guns and things like that. And his son, my father at that time, was in England. And my father was training to be a cardiologist at that time. And he became ultimately a very famous cardiologist. He was a cardiologist to Lord Mountbatten for a time, a cardiologist to the royal family, including the Queen who just died. But anyway, the telegram delivered by a postman in those old days, telegram said, to my father, congratulations, your son has just become a cardiologist, and he's just been inducted into the Royal College of Physicians. By the way, about 50 years later, a few months ago, I was also inducted to the Royal College of Physicians. So that's a romantic story. But the telegram came. My grandfather was very excited. He went to the rooftop of our apartment. He pulled out an old army rifle and he shot a few rounds in the sky to celebrate. That was his way of celebrating. Then he took me and my little brother, whom you've read about, the coffee guy, at Harvard. And my brother was only 4 years old. He took us to a movie. I remember the movie, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. Then he took us to a carnival and then a fancy dinner. And then in the middle of the night, he died. And my memory is being carried by the servants to a neighbor's apartment, women in the house wailing and crying, and me very confused. And then the next day, his ashes being brought in a jar about this big. And my uncle, who was also a member of the family living in the apartment, he said, what happened? What happened to this human being? Yesterday, Alibaba, 40 Thieves, Carnival, celebration, and now he's a bunch of ashes. And he was a bunch of ashes, literally a bunch of ashes in a jar. And I remember at 6 years, actually going through a very profound, fearful existential crisis at the age of 6 years. And my little brother, academic now, but not then, he started losing his skin. His skin started peeling. And my uncles and other people took him to every doctor we could imagine. Nobody could make a diagnosis. Till one person, Mumbai, who was not an MD, he said, he's missing his parents. He's feeling vulnerable. And the metaphor is his skin is falling away. And once his parents come back, he'll be totally fine. And sure, 2 months later, when my parents returned from England, in one day, this little boy didn't have anything on his body. He was totally healed. So now I end up going to medical school. I end up learning anatomy, physiology, biochemistry. Believe it or not, when I went to medical school in the 60s, even then, there was a subject called biophysics. There was there was biochemistry, there was physiology, of course, but there was physics, and there were one or two professors who were telling us that the day will come when we'll study physics and biology together, and it'll explain everything. So then time goes by. I become a doctor. I end up with neuropeptides. I meet a guru in India. He said, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a scientist," which I wasn't. I was a physician, but in a science lab. He said, "What do you study?" I said, "Molecules." He said, "Molecules what?" I said, "Over here, they represent, what the mind does. They represent as biology." And so this guru, who was just a guru, he was steeped in meditation more than anything else. He heard me out very carefully. And he said, "Those molecules are not real. Nothing perceivable or conceivable is real." Now, when I heard that for the first time, it totally shocked me. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Nothing perceivable or conceivable is real. Only the consciousness that conceives and perceives is real. Because everything that's conceivable and perceivable is a momentary snapshot, a perceptual snapshot. It's like the collapse of your wave function. You see it, and by the time you see it, it's gone. And then you make a whole story around it. I have a body, I have a mind, there's a world, but actually there's only consciousness modifying itself as perceptions, which are very misleading. Every perception is a magical lie. You think the ground is stationary, it's spinning at dizzying speeds and hurtling through space at thousands of miles an hour. You think the ground you're standing on is flat, and it's not. You think that you have a solid body and it's proportionately as void as intergalactic space. So whatever you are seeing, including your own body, is not real. The only thing that's real is something that is inconceivable, cannot be perceived, doesn't have a form. And if it doesn't have a form, then it has to be infinite. And if it's infinite, it can't be in space-time. He said this in 5 minutes to me. And then the rest of my life journey is this. I'm reading your stuff and I'm reading other people's stuff. And the more I read it, the more confused I get. It never ends. The origins of space and time. Does space-time emerge from a more fundamental reality? Is the universe also going backward in time? Are there parallel universes? Are there infinite universes? So, I went back to my guru at one point and I said, what the heck is happening? He said, please exchange your cleverness for bewilderment. Because if you're not bewildered by now, you wasted your life. So I'm back to square one, John.
Oh,
I'm
that's
back
good
to
to hear.
square one. I don't think any of these models tell us anything about reality other than what we think about it. And we don't know how we think. We don't know how we perceive. We don't know how an electrical current called an action potential going to the brain produces this experience. So I'm confused.
All right. So that's a great, so you said we agree on some things and we disagree on others. What you just said, that's where we agree. I am in a state, I'm a professor. I'm a science writer. I'd like to think of myself as an intellectual. Presumably, I should know more stuff now. I should be more wise. I should have more answers for young people, my students, my children. And I'm in this bizarre situation of, I feel like I know less the more I pay attention to the world. The paradox of modern science, if it was all just made up as some hardcore postmodern philosophers suggest, then you could just dismiss it and it actually wouldn't be that interesting. The paradox of modern science is that it's so powerful. It's not just made up. It is giving us enormous power to manipulate reality. My smartphone here is based on quantum principles and other principles of modern physics. The jets we fly are based on knowledge of physics. The hydrogen bomb is based on esoteric models of fusion reactions. So our scientific knowledge it has enough of a grip on the world to do things with it. And yet, if you're asking for answers, for illumination from science, which is what physics was promising us, if you go back 30, 40 years, Stephen Hawking was saying a unified physics, theory of physics was going to reveal the mind of God. Give me a break. Physics is just descending into more and more incoherence, and quantum mechanics is right at the heart of all of that. You have these very powerful mathematical models, but when you ask what they mean, everybody has a different answer. There's no agreement on that at all. So I see this as this kind of profound crisis going on in knowledge. I don't think it's just the two of us. I think this is happening out there in physics, in the rest of science, and in philosophy. These are the people who are supposedly, they're the professional truth seekers. They're supposedly trying to figure everything out and tell us what's going on. This might sound like a bad thing, but for me, it's exhilarating, actually, because one of the problems that I've had since I was a kid, is kind of the antithesis of what I was saying before about my feelings of estrangement and alienation and derealization. The antithesis of that is that I just get used to life. I start taking things for granted. I take the people I love for granted. I take everything that I do for granted. Teaching, being a parent, being a boyfriend to my girlfriend. I call her Emily in my book. And I start becoming like an automaton, what philosophers would call zombies. So one of the wonderful outcomes of my quantum experiment was that it made the world really strange to me. And one of the conclusions that I reached is that all our languages, So I was an English major, so I studied literature, poetry, and so that language, that especially English, is the medium in which I'm most comfortable. Quantum mechanics and physics generally, the primary language is mathematics, of course. So that's what I was trying to learn during my quantum experiment. I went back and learned calculus, differential equations. The Schrodinger equation is a differential equation. I also learned linear algebra, which is another of the languages that is essential to learning modern quantum physics. But one of the realizations that I had in my project was that language is just as, or mathematics is just as flawed as a means of coming to terms with the world as ordinary language. The language that most non-mathematicians, non-physicists deal with every day to try to understand each other and understand the world. Language is our means of understanding the world, but it also is limited, it's flawed in certain ways, it's misleading in certain ways, and there's no way around that. I don't think so. Of course, there will be philosophers and physicists who say, we're just waiting for the right mathematics. There's a language that's waiting for us out there that will be transparent, that will reveal the absolute truth once and for all. I don't think that's how it works. I think whatever language we come up with, whether it's algorithms now, a lot of people, Stephen Wolfram, the brilliant physicist, thinks that algorithms, cellular automata, those are the languages that will finally reveal nature's secrets once and for all. But every language only can take us so far. And then there's this absolute truth. There's this mystery that lies beyond that never can be grasped. And I've come to terms with that. I find it kind of exciting. I mean, I still would like some sort of answer that, for example, helps me come to terms with my own mortality a little better. I don't think I'm alone in dealing with anxiety over death and mortality and the eventual end of everything. Physicists are constantly dealing with their mortality. They're not looking at their own death. They're also looking at the extinction of the solar system. The sun in 5 billion years or so, I forget what the figure is now, is going to turn into a red giant and incinerate the solar system. You go like 10 to the Google years in the future, and the universe will reach a state of heat death. This kind of meta death makes it hard to come up with some sort of meaningful system of metaphysics for our lives. And so the answer is not just to give up on that. The answer is just to try to come up with creative solutions to it, to our own mortality, to the abyss of meaninglessness that we're all dealing with out there. And the paradox for me is that dealing with the meaninglessness makes my life meaningful, especially when I can share it with other people. I mean, if I was all alone trying to figure things out, that would be pretty horrible. That would be lonely and depressing. But I can share my feelings of occasional despair, exhilaration, the alienation, the feeling of connectedness with other people, and that makes it tolerable.
I'm speaking to John Horgan. He's a prolific writer of science, a science journalist, but also teaches writing in New Jersey. He's a regular contributor to Scientific American. His latest book is called My Quantum Experiment, which I'm 3/4 of the way through. We are discussing whether science or any other system of human thought, including mathematics, philosophy, religion, quantum mechanics, any system of human thought can give us access to reality. And we have some of the same conundrums, but let's try to think one conundrum through, okay, which you just brought up. You say science is effective. I read in your book, if you understand the Lagrangian, or you understand entanglement, or if you understand this theorem, or you understand Gödel's theorem, it gives us insight into this aspect of reality. And, and these scientific discoveries, they work. They've created this technology. We are speaking to each other. We both share iPhones. We have seen people now land on the moon, and there are probes out there in interstellar space that are telling us there could be 2 trillion galaxies, 2 trillion galaxies, 700 sextillion stars, uncountable trillions of probably habitable planets, maybe 60 billion in just the Milky Way galaxy, based on, the Goldilocks zone and all of this. So all in all, our planet Earth is not even a speck of dust on all the beaches of the world. I went the other day to capture a speck of dust from the beach. A little breeze came, the speck of dust disappeared, and the beach didn't notice. And on this speck of dust is a species called Homo sapiens, whose brain has evolved only since the last 200,000 years as what we call the hominid brain. And it creates models, including mathematical models and stories and Wall Street and money and latitude and longitude. And then soon it confuses these models with the fact that this species created these models, which is now calling reality. So the fact is, yes, these technologies have allowed us to extend our range of human perception and human cognition. But have they actually given access to reality? Because we do not even know where thought comes from, how perception happens. I mean, everything. If I smack you here right now, or on your face, is the experience here? Is the experience in your brain? Or is it on my computer? Where is the experience? I can't even define how experience occurs, and yet every model I've created, including quantum mechanical models, mathematical models, has to be based on first an experience, whatever that experience is, cognitive, perceptual. And that perceptual experience, if we assume that there's a fundamental, formless, infinite, spaceless, timeless, irreducible, incomprehensible, infinite, bewildering, imperceivable, non-local nothingness that is magically turning itself into all this, that's pretty good. I mean, that puts me in a frame of mind that says everything is magical realism. And actually, to surrender to bewilderment or surrender to mystery is probably the only solution, and even probably the only salvation, unless you're a Republican, you can go play golf. That's a nice mystery school for Republicans. But otherwise, why not just make joy the fundamental experience of life in the knowing of this totally bewildered state of being, which is so amorphous, so incomprehensible, and yet we can imbue it with meaning and create a whole universe out of it.
The problem for me is, I mean, I would love to be in a state of mystified joy all the time, because I agree with you. I look at the world, to me, it's infinitely improbable. I think science has kind of demonstrated that the origin of the universe, of this universe, was infinitely improbable. The origin of life was infinitely improbable. And yet here we are, the origin of consciousness, infinitely improbable, out of inanimate matter. So if you put all those improbabilities together, you get this infinite miracle that we live in. And so why not just be agog at it and delight in it? The problem for me, maybe because I was raised Catholic, is what theologians call the problem of evil. So I actually have had a very blessed life. I'm an extremely fortunate person. I found out what I love to do, which is just trying to figure out the world. And I made a living at it. I write about those things, and I teach it now to my students. But for many people, life is very painful, and there's terrible injustice in the world. And it's not clear to me. If you go back 10 years, I believed in this inevitable progress, sort of, jerky at points, but we're getting better and better at granting more rights to people. And so I was feeling pretty good about the future of humanity, feeling good about the future for my children and my students. Now I'm worried, not for myself. I don't have all that much longer here on Earth, but I'm worried for humanity and for nature, for all the other creatures on Earth. And I don't take anything for granted. And so I am always trying to come up with some sort of theology or metaphysics that's consoling out of what physics says and what all the sciences say, and philosophy. And I haven't found anything very consoling. I can't take it for granted, as I think you do, that consciousness is eternal, and that if humanity is somehow destroyed, we destroy ourselves. Europe erupts into some kind of nuclear conflagration that spreads across the planet, and we're wiped out, or an asteroid, or there are all these different ways that we could end. I'm not confident that won't be the end of consciousness in the universe.
So here's my question to you.
Yeah.
There are only three possibilities, okay? The more we think about this, there's the matter-only monism. There's only matter. Somehow we'll explain mind, etc., but there's only matter. That's matter-only monism. Then you have the dualism of Descartes. There's mind and matter. And then there is consciousness-only monism. I can't think of anything outside of these three possibilities.
Yeah.
Now, do we ever question, as you were brought up as a Catholic, where you had certain assumptions. So was I, brought up with a different atmosphere, cultural environment, where we begin with different assumptions. So as I was growing up, and my parents, my mother, and even other people, not in India, sometimes philosophy and metaphysics and dharma and karma become a pastime. People just talk about it forever without thinking that they think they know all about it. But, I was brought up with this question. Have you ever seen a substance called matter? Have you ever actually encountered a substance called matter? Or have you only encountered human perceptions? And, to bring up some very good points you make in your book, what does the world look like to a bat? Thomas Nagel. So why do you assume that the human perception of the world is the objective perception of the reality of the world? If I asked you, is there such a thing as an unseen color? Is there such a thing, unseen color? And even the question doesn't make sense, because if there was something called an unseen color, what would it look like? So every attribute I give to the physical world, whether it's color or sound or shape or form, or even thought or feeling or emotion or imagination, every feature I give to the physical world in the end turns out to be not physical. I mean, in the end, it's just a combination of modalities of awareness. If you were a baby and I asked you, what is this? And you don't even know that you're John and you're male and you're human, you're just a conscious being and you're looking at this. You have no idea this is called a hand or this is called an iPhone. This is a combination of modalities of sensation, period, cognitive or perceptual. Furthermore, a narrow band, which we call human, not the snake band, which is infrared, or the insect band, which is ultraviolet, which are human names also. What the heck is going on? Am I calling the world objective when all I can perceive is a combination of sensations to which we give a name? iPhone, hand, body, nose, Milky Way galaxy, all modified perceptions of this consciousness. And I don't like to use the word eternal because even time is a human concept. So, I would say timeless.
Let me try to shift the conversation slightly. To me, I think we both agree that the materialistic way of understanding reality, that it's all matter, and then matter has weird properties. Gravity is one weird property, electromagnetism, consciousness.
Which are names we've given to human experiences.
Yes. And so consciousness, just another strange property of a peculiar kind of matter. I don't buy that, but instead of just looking at sort of generic perceptions and consciousness, I'm more interested in some moral questions. And in my book on quantum mechanics, one thing I struggle with is how, if at all, is physics related to moral questions. Physicists were talking in the 1980s, when I got into science writing, about a theory of everything. I mean, think of the hubris of that phrase, theory of everything. Physics leaves out so much. It leaves out so many of the things that define our lives, like suffering, like pain, heartbreak, love, and injustice. It leaves out all these moral questions. How can you have a theory of everything that leaves out all those things that are really the essence of life for us humans? Okay, we're made of matter, but there are all these other things that matter to us and that define our lives and steer us in one direction or another that have no place in the equations of physics. So that is where I think physics really fails, and it's inadequate. Whether or not there ever can be a science, some kind of mathematical model of the world, I play with some ideas in my book. Linear algebra models using matrices and vectors to try to model criminal justice systems in the US, which are so oppressive and racist in many ways. Can science take on that? Can science bring together its descriptions of what is? Science is sort of telling us what exists. Can it bring that together with what should be, with these moral intuitions that we have, that the world is broken, it's not as it should be, that we should remake it in ways to make ourselves happier, make all people happier, and make the world more fair? So that's the kind of thing. I don't know if that's a leftover from my Catholic upbringing, or if it's just something that was instilled in me by being brought up in a liberal democracy. But those issues matter a lot to me. And those are related to the problem of evil, which I mentioned before. If there is this consciousness that permeates reality, which is what a lot of people call God, that transcends time and transcends space, and that has some kind of personal connection to us, why is the world so unfair? Why are some people extremely fortunate, like you and I, and other people really get screwed? It just doesn't seem right.
So,
And
John, let me ask you two questions based on what you just said. If everything is material, then how does matter ask questions like the ones you ask? Who is, when you say, who am I, is your brain, which is made of material objects, ordinary atoms, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, which are in my soup. How do those atoms end up asking, who am I? What do I want? Why is there evil? Does matter ask questions? Number one. Number two, if reality is infinite, why should it leave anything out? Why do we only need the sacred and not the profane? Why can't, is not all experience by contrast? Can you have an up without a down or a hot without a cold? And if it is infinite, it must contain the ability to manifest as infinite experiences. I don't even use the word object. This is not an object. Before I can call it an object, it's an experience. As an experience, it's a perception and an interpretation of the perception. And you can't have a perception or interpretation without a conscious being making an interpretation of its own self, which is its perception. So, I was speaking the other day to Will Check. You've interviewed just about everybody. But, once in a while, I get a chance to talk to these great minds. And, I used to be intimidated by minds because, he's a Nobel Prize winner. He knows physics. Therefore, he must know more about life than I know. Okay. But then I realized there's no one who knows more about life or less about life. We are all equally ignorant about life. Knowing physics helps me to do certain equations, which helps solve certain problems and help define the parameters of experiments. But where are experiments designed? In human consciousness. Where are observations made? In human consciousness. Where are theories conceived? In human consciousness. I don't think a bat or a giraffe even knows that it's called a bat or a giraffe. These are human constructs, and human constructs created mathematics. But why not assume that what we call the physical universe is also a human construct, And then it all becomes quite simple. Mathematics is a human construct. Language is a human construct. But so is the physical universe a human construct. There ain't no such thing.
I've got to ask you something. So you are, I think of you as somebody who is very knowledgeable about these spiritual traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, but you're also knowledgeable. The West has its.
I've written 3 books on Christianity. Of my 95 books, 10 have to do with God.
Okay, so I'm curious about whether, first of all, do you believe, since I was a kid, I first learned that there was this thing called enlightenment or nirvana or satori. There are all these different names for some kind of supreme experience or a state of being where everything makes sense. There are different descriptions of it. My feeling about it was that everything would make sense, and some of the conflicts that seem to define our lives would dissolve, and you just kind of, the way I thought of it was that I'm in this state of like, what the hell, what's going on, huh? Well, that would be replaced by a big aha that lasts forever, an aha that is permanent, and I can live in that state of aha, this revelation. And now I'm not sure that exists anymore. I've met a bunch of gurus. I've met people who purport to be enlightened in this supreme state, and they're all over the place.
Actually, as you know, I have a weekly column. So today's column is about enlightenment. I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you. But I think the only enlightenment there is getting away from an identity that we think is by itself. there's no such thing. Like when you talk about quantum entanglement or superposition or non-local correlation, I believe that's what reality is. It's a cloud of probabilities. And one of the probabilities is now showing up on my computer by an entity called John Horgan, all very provisional. But is there something called John Horgan? And I've come to the conclusion, if I get rid of the idea that there's something called Deepak Chopra, actually I'm all set. Because if I say Deepak Chopra, which one? Fertilized egg, zygote, embryo, baby, toddler, 8-year-old, immature, emotionally, could have run for president if it was Trumpian times. But, which one is me? I can't find something called Deepak Chopra. Once I get rid of that entity called Deepak Chopra, I still exist. I still exist. So I can say with certainty, there is existence, number one, unless you deny it. I don't know what it is, but I say there is existence. But I also say there is awareness of existence. Because if there was no awareness of existence, then for existence is unavailable. So existence must be awareness. I must be that. Only I'm confusing myself with my selfie. So when I read all these people, Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. Well, I find some truth in that. When Moses says, I am that I am, I find some truth in that. There is a common essence to our appearance as this or that. There is a common essence. And when the Eastern wisdom traditions talk about illusion, they're not saying that the illusion is not reality. They're just saying it is not what it appears to be. So it appears to be an iPhone, but actually it's a sensation, and it's consciousness knowing itself as that sensation, which humans call an iPhone. I mean, I have no problem with that. And that is transcendence. And I experience it. No, I'm now 76. And I'm preparing for my final chapter, which is, in my tradition, there are 4 ashrams. First 25 years education. Second 25 years fame, fortune, family. Third 25 years giving back. And fourth, what we call self-realization, recognizing that the whole thing was a dream. If I asked you what happened to your childhood, you'd say, it's a dream. But I asked you what happened to your teenage years, you'd say it's a dream. But if I asked you what happened to last night, it's a dream. What happened to this morning? What happens to these words? By the time you hear them, they don't exist. We're all ghosts. We're all fictional characters. And it does not matter if the cosmic wave background goes back to the Big Bang 14 billion years ago, or the sound you hear right now, by the time you hear it, it doesn't exist. All we experience is the past. We have never experienced what we call ourself. And that is because we've been bamboozled into these constructs that say we are physical machines that have somehow learned to manufacture thoughts.
Let me ask you something that I've been struggling with myself. I sort of feel, so I'm just a little younger than you. I'm 69. And I feel as though I should be enlightened in the sense of being content, just glad to be alive, grateful to be alive, and maybe entering the 4th stage or 3rd stage, certainly, that you're talking about. I still have stuff I want to do. I still have ambition. And, like, I want to write books. It's what could be more narcissistic and ambitious than writing books and thinking I have something to say about quantum mechanics of all things. I was an English major, literature major, and I think I have something to teach people about quantum mechanics. It's ridiculous. It's very egotistical. So, and at the same time, I realize that, all this is transient, and I should kind of be calm about it. Can you be in a state of transcendence that you're describing, or enlightenment? I don't know if anybody even uses that term anymore. And still have these goals, still be ambitious, still want to do things, still want to argue with people about the nature of things. How do you deal with that? I assume you struggle with these sorts of things yourself. So I just
do
wonder.
less and less. When I had my arguments with, say, Dawkins or other people like that, Dawkins treated me like trash. When I mentioned Freeman Dyson, he said, we should sue you, etc., etc. He never said this. But I'll tell you, I was personally offended. I even wrote to Freeman Dyson. I said, I quoted you from your book, Infinite in All Directions, where you make the statement, every quantum experiment forces the atom to make a choice. I quoted you, and this guy screamed at me. And so what do you have to say? And he wrote a very nice letter to both him and to me. He says, there are 3 riddles that have confused me all my life. Freeman Dyson, whom you knew, I'm sure you've interviewed him. He said, one is the unpredictable movement of particles. He didn't say random, unpredictable, which is very nice distinction. Unpredictable could be creative. I think a predictable system is non-creative. An algorithm is non-creative. Said unpredictable movement of particles, number 1. Number 2, our own consciousness. And number 3, a universe that is fine-tuned mathematically for mind and the universe and us. He says, I don't know the answers to these riddles, but I think they're connected. And Dawkins, in his email, dismissed that. He says, it's not good enough to have a feeling. Not good enough to have a feeling. And he's talking to one of the greatest physicists for his time. Now, I know he's mellowed since then. I know I have mellowed. And I think in a few years, we're all going to be dead. It doesn't matter anyway. They've been talking about this since Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and all the sages of the Upanishads. But the point is, if you assume that joy can only come and happiness can only come when I get rid of a false construct, and that false construct is me, Deepak. If I don't think about me, there's nothing to be worried about. You might say you're thinking of your children, your grandchildren, your this and that. It's all hocus pocus. You're ultimately only thinking about yourself, and the self that you think about doesn't exist. That's why these guys are so joyful when they realize that all you have to do is go back to the fundamental truth, which is love, compassion, empathy, joy, equanimity, and don't be self-concerned, because all your dilemmas are coming from a false identity to begin with.
Once you reach that point, do you still want to write? Once you reach that point, do you still want to write books?
So, I had an extraordinary experience recently. I had contracts for 3 more books. I canceled them recently because in the past, I've had certain experiences through psychedelics, and I noticed that you did too. But I'm now convinced that what psychedelics do is loosen the neural networks of the conditioned mind. That's what they do, including the default mode network. And then you encounter reality, because everything else that you perceived is not real. It's an impermanent manifestation of that reality. So right now, what I do is I meditate on my death, and I've had some very interesting transpersonal, extraordinary experiences of other dimensions that these guys talk about. These guys, Wilczek and all these guys talk about. What's his name at Caltech? Sean Carroll, Infinite Universes, Infinite Lucas. I now think they're onto something, that these actually exist because they're all possibility states in an infinite, timeless consciousness.
Something, what's weird, here's some of the, I never can reach any kind of fixed position on anything. So many worlds theory, part of me thinks it's ridiculous. This is an interpretation of quantum mechanics. It says that at every point where the universe can go in different ways. It actually goes in all those ways. And so at this moment, there are versions of you and me that are branching off into other universes.
So now I've seen them in my mystical states.
Well, so there's a rational, supposedly rational, logical part of me that says, come on, that's bullshit. It's just too messy. And it's too much baggage to add to your metaphysics. All these other universes, who needs them? And they also come out of string theory and something called inflationary theory. But then there's this other part of me that has always had a sense, again, since I was very young, of these branchings, and especially at very bad, scary points of my life. I've had some near-death experiences, by which I mean I almost died a bunch of times. I almost drowned once. I almost died in an automobile accident. I've been in some bad situations, and I escaped through sheer luck. And I sometimes think of these shadow selves going off into other universes. It's like I can feel it. I can sense it. And living other lives that are very bad, or in some cases, very good, better than my life. And so I dismiss many worlds rationally, intellectually. And then there's this emotional part of me that is thinking, wow, I don't know. I feel like viscerally, I can sense those other worlds out there, with having this strange interaction with this world, interfering with it possibly somehow.
Yeah, this is what the Buddhists believe, and now I'm having those experiences, that these worlds are actually not dimensions of space-time. They are actually frequency states of consciousness with leaky margins. So, and you can get there with psychedelics, or through meditation, or through these dream lokas. Now, I am communicating with a guy who's physically dead right now, and this is the first time I'm sharing this publicly, because I canceled my contracts. He shows up at night in my dreams. When I open my eyes, there he is, like an apparition. He's dead, by the way, technically. And he tells me to close his eyes, and I can't figure this out now. So, but it's real for me, okay? I see him with my eyes closed. I have his photo here on my iPhone. But in the middle of the night, I open my eyes, and there he is, sitting there right in front of me. Doesn't say anything. So I said, I'm canceling all my books till I figure this one out. Am I hallucinating, or is the whole thing a hallucination? So if this present reality is a lucid dream in a vivid now, why not infinite lokas? Why not infinite dimensions? They're all dreamscapes with fictional characters, and we give them names. So we call them John, or a giraffe, or a hippopotamus, or a rock, or a Milky Way galaxy. But they're all perceptions, modified dreamscapes, which include the fictional character, you and me. But there are 8 billion others on this planet right now, and most of them are not even thinking about this. They're worried about their mortgage.
I like that. William James in The Varieties of Religious Experience had this wonderful phrase. Here's this supremely rational person and a very anxious person. William James really wanted to figure life out, and he thought that mysticism might have the secret to his own constant panic attacks and depression. And at the end of it, he couldn't find a mystical metaphysics that he could believe, because he was very skeptical. But he said, these sorts of experiences that we have, they forbid a premature closing of our accounts with reality. And I love that phrase. And I would say that will be, I hope it will be, always the case. God forbid we should actually find a theory of everything that is so compelling, a theory or a theology that everybody goes, oh yeah, okay, right. Now everything makes sense. Now we've got it. because then what happens to our imagination? What happens?
And the theory of everything is not the theory of reality anyway, because it excludes that which is seeking to find the answers.
Right. Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
So we have run out of time, but I'd like to continue this at a certain point, if you're willing, when I finish the book. And
Sure.
I'd love our audience to check out the book, My Quantum Experiment, and you'll find John's credentials and how you can get the book at the end of this conversation. John, I want to continue this conversation with you because, as usual, we have more questions. We have no answers, period. We have only questions. And I just don't think carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen in various combinations are asking these questions.
On that, we agree. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.